Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. So, if you constantly feel like you're running on fumes, even after a solid night's sleep, well, you're definitely not alone. Today we're diving into a fascinating method to completely rewire how we structure our lives to fight off burnout. It's called the UTRI method, and it actually explores the science of why doing absolutely nothing might just be the absolute most important thing you can do for your brain.
Okay, let's dive into this with a story from our source material that I think is incredibly relatable. The author describes sitting down at their desk on a Sunday morning, fully intending to get ahead on work for the week. They were motivated, but about 20 minutes later, they just stopped. They weren't sick, they weren't even physically tired in the normal sense. They had just reached a point where they physically and mentally could not keep going. They hit this sudden, invisible wall. I mean, how many times have you felt exactly that? You've got the intention, you've got the coffee, but the engine just stalls out completely.
Well, to understand why that happens, we kind of have to look at the culture we live in. Modern life treats productivity like a religion. We are completely conditioned to optimize every single minute of our day. We stack every hour, we double book ourselves, and we treat any open gap in our schedule like it's a problem that urgently needs to be solved, right? If we aren't producing, consuming, or actively improving ourselves, we feel incredibly guilty. But the reality is, this constant, relentless drive is exactly why we're all so fundamentally exhausted.
And this brilliantly illustrates what's going on. Think about a car engine. If you press the pedal to the floor and run a car constantly at its maximum RPM, it doesn't actually drive faster for very long. What happens? It overheats, the engine block warps, and the car dies young. It literally destroys itself. On the flip side, running at 80% capacity ensures longevity and sustained performance. Yet as humans, we are stubbornly doing the exact same thing to ourselves that destroys that car engine. We're running our lives at 100% capacity instead of 80%, leaving absolutely zero margin for error, stress, or, just regular life.
And that brings us to the core of today's explainer. The cure for this overheating is a Japanese concept called utori, which translates to spaciousness, leeway, or structural slack. And what's fascinating here is that this isn't about being lazy. Leaving this deliberate empty space isn't a failure of scheduling, it's the actual point. It's about intentionally building extra capacity into your life so that you aren't perpetually one bad day or one traffic jam away from total mental collapse.
Now, this isn't just some abstract philosophical idea. Let's look at the science of empty space and why our brains actually require this structural slack. According to the source material, here's our quick roadmap for building utori into our lives. Step 1. Block empty time. Step 2. Embrace silence during transitions. And Step 3. Create financial utori. Let's get right into it.
So, step 1 is blocking off empty time on your calendar. But the rules here are incredibly strict. This is not free time, where you finally catch up on running errands or doing the laundry. It's also not what we'd call productive rest, so you can't use this time to read a self-help book, listen to an educational seminar, or plan out your week. The rule is strictly this. You are not allowed to do absolutely anything useful. Now, for those of us who worship at the altar of productivity, sitting and doing nothing useful feels almost physically painful at first, doesn't it? It feels like a massive waste. But just wait until you see what it actually does to your brain.
The research behind this is just fascinating. Data from the University of Illinois demonstrates that these brief periods of doing nothing, these mental diversions, do not interrupt your focus. They actually restore it. When you let your mind truly wander without a task or a screen to focus on, your creative insight absolutely shoots up. Why? Because your brain finally has the open room it needs to connect disparate pieces of information, connections it simply couldn't make while you were intensely staring at a spreadsheet or answering emails all morning.
So, the crucial point is that we have to stop treating every single quiet moment as a void that needs to be filled. And that is step 2. Stop filling the transitions. Just think about your daily routine for a second. Walking to the metro, waiting for the kettle to boil, standing in line at the grocery store. What do? If you're like most of us, you immediately pull out your phone to check Instagram or you pop in your earbuds to listen to a podcast. We've essentially trained our brains to never, ever be quiet.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the massive 2x multiplier effect. Data from Microsoft's Productivity Lab found that by constantly filling these transitions and subjecting ourselves to constant interruptions, we actually make our brains brittle. In fact, it doubles the likelihood that we'll make mistakes on complex tasks later on. No way, right? But by never giving our brains a moment of transition, we are literally halving our accuracy and destroying our cognitive resilience.
But look at what happens when you reverse this habit. The author notes that when they started just letting the silences sit there, just walking without headphones or standing by the microwave without looking at their phone, a profound shift occurred.
their brain actually started generating ideas faster than they could write them down. That is the magic of Zutori. By removing the constant input, that silent space acted as a powerful catalyst. The brain, no longer forced to process a podcast or a social media feed, finally had the slack it needed to generate its own massive amount of ideas.
Let's move to and see how this builds into the third step, which takes this whole idea out of our calendars and into our wallets: financial utori. Now, in personal finance, we're usually taught to give every single dollar a job. Pay bills, invest, save, right? But financial utori suggests taking a small pocket of your income, say having 95% budgeted and leaving just 5% entirely unbudgeted. This 5% is your financial slack. This tiny, jobless pocket of money is absolutely crucial. It represents the profound freedom of not being at full capacity. That 5% is not an emergency fund. It's not saving for a vacation. It literally just sits there, doing nothing. And surprisingly, the source material notes that having this unallocated money does more for your mental health than almost any other productivity hack out there. It removes that suffocating feeling that your finances are running at maximum RPM, giving you a really deep psychological sense of structural freedom.
As we start to wrap up this explainer, there's a vital paradigm shift to take away here. Empty space is where everything good comes from. For years, the modern workplace and hustle culture have told us that empty space is the enemy. We've been taught that an empty hour is a wasted hour. But whether it's an unbooked 20 minutes on your calendar, a silent walk to the bus stop, or a small percentage of unallocated money in your checking account, this empty space is actually the very source of our best thinking, our creativity, and our resilience.
Which brings us to perhaps the most important distinction of all: understanding the difference between a sleep problem and a utori problem. If you're constantly exhausted and you sleep for 8 or 9 hours but wake up feeling just as drained, you are not suffering from a lack of sleep. You're suffering from a lack of structural slack. You're running your engine at 100% capacity all day long, and sleep alone simply cannot fix a utori problem. Only intentional empty space can.
So I want to leave you with this provocative challenge. What happens to your stress if you do absolutely nothing for 20 minutes? I challenge you to try it this week. Block off 20 minutes, put away the phone, the books, the to-do lists, and just let your mind wander. Observe what it does to your stress levels and your creativity. If you found this perspective on curing burnout helpful, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We're going to keep diving into fascinating materials like this to help make your life and work feel truly effortless. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will see you in the next one.